Welcome to today's deep dive. We're starting with a premise today that, well, I'm just going to warn you right now, it's going to sting a little bit.
It definitely stung me when I first read through the material.
Right. Because we are looking at this massive stack of research and frameworks all focused on the creator economy, audience psychology, how we communicate. And the core thesis just hits you right on page one. It basically says, nobody cares about your content.
Which is, yeah, it forces you to look in the mirror before we even really get started.
Absolutely.
And it feels incredibly dismissive at first glance, like an attack on your work. But when you really analyze the material, it becomes clear this isn't a critique of anyone's specific talent or their value as a creator. It is an objective observation of how human beings allocate their absolute most precious resource.
Which is their attention.
Exactly.
Right.
Pure market reality.
And our mission for you today is to really decode that allocation. By the time we wrap up this deep dive, you are going to understand this invisible filter that dictates human attention. Because whether you are, a content creator trying to build an audience, or a manager running a Tuesday morning meeting, or even just someone trying to get a point across in a flooded inbox.
Which is all of us, really.
Exactly. You have to understand why your message absolutely must be tied to your audience's survival.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we view the information we put out into the world, because the framework we're exploring today posits this really harsh divide. It says that until your message connects to someone's financial, emotional, or identity survival, it is categorized by their brain as nearly entertainment.
And entertainment is a luxury.
Right. Survival is a necessity. If you aren't threatening or protecting their livelihood, their sense of self, or their place in the social hierarchy, they treat whatever you're saying as entirely optional.
I know the natural objection here, because I felt it myself when I was going through the notes. You might be listening to this right now and thinking, but wait, I'm teaching people things. I'm providing high-quality educational value. Surely there is a market for pure education.
Oh, that is the reflex for most professionals. I add value. But the counter-argument laid out in this research is that we are operating in an environment of total abundance. Think about it. 50 years ago, if you had specialized knowledge, people had to give you their attention.
Because you were the bottleneck.
Yes, you were the only access point to that information in their town or their company. Today, offering education is just no longer enough to guarantee an audience, because the sum total of human knowledge is sitting in everyone's pocket right now.
Value is everywhere. Information is completely infinite.
But human attention is strictly selective. We simply do not have the bandwidth to process infinite information, so our brains aggressively filter what actually gets through.
And the research identifies 4 specific pillars that bypass this mental firewall, right? People genuinely only pay attention to things that affect their money, their status, their relationships, and their security.
That's the list.
If your information doesn't explicitly impact one of those 4 areas, it just gets filtered out as background noise. Audiences do not care about your clever theoretical framework if it doesn't hit one of those pillars.
You really don't. And it's helpful to look at a really mundane, everyday topic to see how this plays out in reality.
Let's do it.
Imagine you're creating an educational tutorial about Excel spreadsheets. You title it How to Use VLOOKUP. It's perfectly accurate, it's highly educational, and it will likely get absolutely zero traction.
Because it's relying entirely on that promise of abstract value. Learn this thing.
Exactly.
But if we take that exact same technical information, the exact same tutorial, and we target the status and money pillars, the framing changes completely. The video becomes, say, the Excel mistake costing you your promotion.
Boom.
Yes.
Suddenly you've triggered that survival instinct.
Right. The underlying education is identical.
Right.
They're still just teaching VLOOKUP. But the delivery mechanism now bypasses the filter because the viewer feels a direct threat to their career trajectory.
The brain perceives a tangible risk to its social and financial standing. We constantly flatter ourselves into thinking people want our brilliant, abstract ideas.
They do.
But they generally don't. They want concrete solutions to their own immediate vulnerabilities.
I was so fascinated by the specific psychological mechanism the materials use to describe this. They called the survival filter.
Yeah, that's a great term for it.
It's like our brains are basically acting as ruthless bouncers at a club, just asking one single instantaneous question of every piece of incoming information. And that question is, does this matter to me right now?
And the right now is the most important part of that sentence. It's entirely rooted in the present moment. The bouncer isn't asking if this will matter in 5 years or if it's a theoretically important concept for humanity. The filter demands immediate personal relevance. And the brutal consequence of that bouncer saying no is the frictionless scroll.
Well, the scroll.
The user simply swipes away. Or if you're in a corporate setting, they zone out. They start checking Slack or their email under the table during your presentation.
Which highlights this massive, massive disconnect between the people making the content and the people consuming it. The framework points out that creators and communicators constantly talk about what they find interesting. But the market only cares about what feels urgent.
There is so much ego involved in creation. When someone decides to make a video essay or write a blog post or even draft a business proposal, they are usually driven by their own internal curiosity.
Right. They uncover some historical anecdote or a data trend and think, oh, wow, this is fascinating.
But the market is drowning in fascinating things.
It really is.
It only stops scrolling for the urgent things. Urgency is tied to the immediate physical, financial, or social environment of the user.
Which brings us to a really painful reality for anyone who puts their work out into the world. It's what the source calls the tragedy of good content.
This part is tough to read.
It is. Because the underlying research makes a huge point to emphasize that your work can be objectively good. It can be incredibly smart, meticulously structured, beautifully edited. You can have the expensive 4K camera, the perfect lighting, flawless audio, and the project can still fail completely.
Because technical proficiency is just the baseline expectation now.
Right.
It is the cost of entry. It is not the differentiator anymore. If that smart, well-edited work doesn't connect to a specific pain point, a deep aspiration, a lurking fear, or a sense of urgency, it is ignored.
And what's worse is that the audience doesn't stage a protest to tell you why they didn't like it. The content just quietly dies. It fades into the algorithmic void.
Which is the ultimate existential frustration of creating in a vacuum.
It is. You pour your energy into a project, and there isn't even a grand rejection for you to learn from. It just dies quietly. And that happens because it didn't pass that survival filter. It was aesthetically pleasing, but it wasn't necessary.
It didn't tap into a fear that was keeping the audience awake at night, or an aspiration they were actively sweating to achieve.
So if we are stuck in this trap of making perfectly good but universally ignored content, how do we fix this? How do we break out? The materials we're analyzing today suggest a complete rewiring of our mindset, something they refer to as the shift.
And the shift requires abandoning a question that most creators naturally lean on as a crutch.
We have to stop asking ourselves, is this insightful? Which is such a tough pill to swallow, because being insightful is the goal for most smart professionals.
Of course it is.
We all want to be perceived as thought leaders. We want to offer unique perspectives.
Insight is wonderful. But again, in the attention economy, insight is a luxury good. The shift requires replacing "is this insightful" with a much sharper, much more grounded question, which is, does this solve something painful or expensive?
That changes everything.
It really does, because it takes you out of the theoretical clouds and puts you right down in the dirt with the people you are actually trying to reach.
The materials argue that the more directly a piece of communication is tied to real-world consequences, the more it actually resonates. Insight makes someone nod their head and say, well, that's clever, right before they scroll away and forget about it completely.
Exactly. Whereas solving something painful or expensive makes them stop. It makes them engage, take notes, and literally forward it to their peers.
You mentioned being in the dirt with the audience. The source material talks about the difference between thinking like a philosopher and thinking like an operator.
Yes. A philosopher deals in abstractions and universal truths. An operator is in the trenches dealing with logistics, execution, and real-world stakes.
And to think like an operator means you have to deeply study the people you are talking to and map out their actual anxieties.
You have to know what keeps them up at night.
And the research gives us a very practical way to identify those stakes. It all comes down to asking what your specific audience is actively afraid of losing.
Which goes back to those pillars we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We have 4 major categories of fear to look at here. Are they afraid of losing their time? Are they afraid of losing their income? Are they terrified of losing their clients? Or are they afraid of losing their authority and status?
If you are preparing a presentation for middle management and you don't know which of those 4 things they are most worried about, you are essentially just guessing in the dark.
You're throwing darts blindfolded.
A middle manager might not care about a new software tool that saves time if that same tool threatens their authority or makes their department look redundant. You have to locate the specific nerve.
Because content that successfully touches those nerves spreads. You are essentially handing the audience a weapon to defend themselves against that specific loss.
You're tossing a life preserver to someone who is actively worrying about drowning in one of those specific areas.
Which brings us to the final tactical application of this entire philosophy, something the framework calls the creator upgrade.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes, because once you recognize the delusion of offering pure value, and you understand the survival filter, and you shift into that operator mindset, you actually have to execute this in the work you produce. And you do that by making the stakes highly visible.
You cannot allow the stakes to remain implied. You have to literally show the audience the alternative. You have to paint a vivid picture of what their reality will look like if they choose to ignore the problem your content is addressing.
Let's ground this back in a corporate environment. Say you're that mid-level manager, and you are pitching a new piece of project management software to your vice president. If you just list the features you know, it'd have a clean interface, great integration capabilities, you are relying on the delusion of pure value. You're hoping they find it insightful.
Which they won't, because their survival filter will instantly categorize it as non-urgent.
Right. But if you apply this tactical creator upgrade, you tie the software directly to the stakes. You change the pitch. You say, if we do not adopt this centralized system, our main competitor will outpace our client response time by 40% next quarter, which directly threatens our top 3 legacy accounts.
Boom. You just made the alternative completely visible.
You took their fear of losing income and clients, and you held a mirror right up to it. You made the cost of ignoring your pitch significantly higher than the cost of paying attention to it.
It forces engagement. They can't unhear that. And this dynamic is perfectly captured in one of the most resonant observations from the research. The quote is, "Comfortable content rarely grows. Necessary content does."
I love that line.
Because humans are biologically wired to prioritize necessity over comfort when deciding where to spend their mental energy. Comfort is what we seek when all our other needs are completely secure. Which, let's be honest, is almost never the case in a professional setting.
Never.
Necessity is what actually drives human behavior.
So when we synthesize this entire approach, a really clear picture emerges. When we stop worrying about being merely interesting and we start focusing entirely on being urgent, we fundamentally change our relationship with our audience.
We do.
By tying our message to real stakes and visible consequences, we don't just get a temporary, fleeting spike in views. As the text says, we build gravity.
It is such an apt way to visualize the shift. You stop being a momentary distraction, like a firework that explodes, gets a quick glance, and then just fades away.
Right.
By consistently connecting your ideas to their survival, you develop a mass that pulls people in. You become a fixture in their daily or weekly routine because your insights are a required component of their own success.
You become a planet with a strong, undeniable orbit. They can't ignore you, even if they want to.
Exactly.
So I want to address you, the person listening to this right now. I want you to reflect on your own work. Think about the very next thing you are going to publish, write, or present.
Right, whatever's next on your desk.
Whether you are building a massive marketing brand, putting together a quarterly review, or just writing a crucial memo to your team, are you relying on your work just being smart and well-structured? Or are you actively engineering it to pass the survival filter? Have you made your message genuinely necessary for the person on the receiving end?
If we distill this extensive framework down to its absolute core, it is this. Audiences are not indifferent to you. They are simply entirely focused on themselves.
Yes.
Mastering the connection between your ideas and their survival, translating your knowledge into shields against their fears and tools for their aspirations, that is the only reliable mechanism for capturing and holding human attention in an increasingly noisy world. Nobody cares about your content. They care about their survival.
It completely changes the lens through which you view everything you consume and everything you create. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to turn over in your own mind.
Let's hear it.
We've established today that our brains are ruthlessly wired to filter information based on survival, fear, and urgency. But if that is the fundamental truth of the attention economy, what happens to our collective capacity to appreciate ideas that are simply beautiful, nuanced, or complex? Does a survival-driven marketplace inevitably force us into a world where absolutely every message, idea, and product must be framed as a looming crisis just to be seen?
That is a fascinating question.
It really makes you wonder. It's something worth chewing on the next time you find yourself scrolling through your feed, evaluating exactly what makes you stop and pay attention. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.